everyone. My name is Denise Thomas. I am one of the co-founders of the Sunshine Education Coalition. Let's get some statistics about the school to prison pipeline as it relates to literature. Prisons actually base some of the future planning on third grade and fourth grade literacy rates. So what does that mean? It means that if a child cannot read in the third or fourth grade accurately on grade level, they're already predicting that they will not do well throughout the rest of the time that they spend on high school. So what we are suggesting to you all to do is to focus on literacy. Find out what's happening in your child's school, find out what's happening in their classrooms. Ask yourself, what is your child reading? And understand that it ties into all the other grade levels. So we hope to see you during our 28 Days of Black Brilliance. It's happening in the month of February, as well as check us out online to find out more information about stats and statistics dealing with the school to prison pipeline. Visit us at www.sunshineeducationcoalition.org. Good evening, and welcome to the Sunshine Education Coalition's 28 Days of Black Brilliance. And we're so excited to bring you this fantastic panel that's before you. My name is Denise Thomas. I am one of the co-chairs of the Sunshine Education Coalition. And this week on Valentine's Day, we're focusing on nurturing greatness. So I'd like to start off by, first of all, thanking our sponsor, Teaching for the Culture, Bianca Goolsby. I'd also like to thank our co-chair, April Cobb, as well as our secretary, Angela Schroden, and for putting this wonderful panel together. And now to introduce our panelists, we have Akela Johnson, he's a licensed mental health counselor. And then we have Ms. Laura Jones McCoy, with also a licensed mental health counselor intern. And Mr. Brandon Wolf from Equality Florida. He's the LGBTQ advocate. And I want to thank you so much for being here this evening.
Thanks, Denise.
Thank you. So starting off, to tell everybody about the Sunshine Education Coalition, we are a grassroots organization, and we are focused on bringing out the best in our Black youth, but specifically focusing on the issues that are concerning a lot of our Black males, and especially the school to prison pipeline. So before we get into anything else, we want to talk about a little bit about what's going on with our panel this week in terms of nurturing greatness. So we're focusing on people and places who are specializing in fostering great mental health and physical health of our youth. So now, starting off, the Sunshine Education Coalition, our primary purpose is to illuminate, eradicate the school to prison pipeline. So to begin this conversation tonight, can you tell us, each of you tell us, what are your thoughts and beliefs about the school to prison pipeline? And we can let's start with Laura. How are you?
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
School to prison pipeline, when it relates to our Black males, oftentimes our children are being kicked out of class for behavioral issues, which later leads to expulsions, which later leads to DJJ, and those types of issues.
Ms. Johnson, go ahead.
Good evening, everyone. I do agree with Laura as if that the policy that they have, there's already a strike against our Black male students being just the fact that they're Black, and then there's the misconception of their behavior is often misunderstood. So I think the policy actually can be very unfair to our brown and Black males. And definitely the transition, even if they get in trouble, they go to DJJ or even alternative school, just to transition going back to traditional school, there's some challenges and barriers because it's already listed, whether, their behaviors, charges, or whatever it is. So I think that right there is already against them for the transition of trying to come back to traditional school, even if they have a second chance.
Yeah. I really appreciate that. And I think the data backs all of that up, right? The data tells us that zero tolerance policies end up harming kids of color and very specifically Black boys. We know that, Black boys are more likely to be reprimanded, more likely to be pulled into the principal's office, more likely then to have run-ins with law enforcement. And then, of course, we know they're into the school to prison pipeline construct. Some of the things I think that we've got to talk about, and I'm excited to talk about this tonight. First of all, we have to address the fact that more law enforcement officers in schools is not solving the problem. We can't just continue to put school resource officers in uniforms at every corner. We can't continue to throw kids in handcuffs because that isn't solving any of the problems. And then the other thing that we have to talk about is how we're resourcing communities. We already know that the educational system is unfairly resourced across the state of Florida and across the country. We know that based on people's zip codes, they can get better access to resources in the classroom, things like newer textbooks and better technology, better computers. And so we've got to ask questions about how are we giving young people the resources they need in order to thrive, at the same time that we're not simply picking up the mass incarceration system and dropping it on top of schools. I think if we can tackle both of those things, we'll have a real honest conversation about giving young people, especially young Black boys, what they need to thrive, instead of simply shuffling them off into a mass incarceration funnel.
Absolutely, and that's the one thing that really stands out. So we know, so we're all in agreement that this is a real issue, that this is not something that is just made up, that this has been going on for quite some time, and that it has taken us a long time for us to get to this point. So what, in terms of what we can do collectively, and I love the answer that you had, Brandon, in terms of what's going on with our society itself. It's a number of things. So what parts of that do we see working together to create this issue that's happening? Is it all on the school system, or what else? What other factors are involved in that? And Fikile, can you answer that question?
Yes, absolutely. I agree with Brandon. I think a lot of collaboration is just not in the school system, but maybe definitely some community resources that need to be implemented or come into the school to provide and show these young men things that they may not have been shown before. Mentor services, big brother services, any of those type of services. I think just reaching out to the community to bring those into the school. I do agree with Brandon when he said just having more officers. That's definitely not the issue. I think a lot of times that can be more of a trigger and traumatizing. And I've seen firsthand just how they approach our brown and Black kids versus how they approach different ones. So it's kind of more of aggressive, to where they expect the aggressive and they expect to even be verbally and rough, to where it's not even necessary. So I'm thinking maybe just a lot of community resources and collaborations going into the schools.
And Laura, what are your thoughts on that, in terms of how did we get here to this point, and what do we need to do to solve that?
I think overall, collectively, it should be communities, it should be teachers, it should be pastors' involvement, most definitely family involvement, bringing families in, bringing the parents in, having that conversation with every any resources possible. So if there have a roundtable meeting, if there was a neighbor that can come in and mentor that kid, that would be good. If there is a church activity or a minister that can run a program, for our at-risk kids, that would be great as well.
One of the things that I like to talk about when I'm talking about policy and local government, and certainly our school systems fall into this, is I want to see the receipts for everything that you're spending our money on. I want to know that when you're investing taxpayer dollars, when you're investing my money back into society, that it's returning on that investment, that it's doing the thing you said it was going to do. And unfortunately, I think that a lot of our local municipalities are not showing the receipts. They're pouring money into budgets that have been written the same way for 40, 50, 60 years. They pour money into a punitive incarceral system that puts people behind bars instead of invests in their humanity. And as a result, we see those things show up in our society. So I know that I have challenged My city commissioners, I've challenged the mayor of Orlando, and I've asked questions about how do you know that when I give you $100 of my tax money, that it's turning into successful, thriving young adults who go out and make a difference in the world? How can you demonstrate that to me? I don't believe that, putting more guns on hips in the hallways of schools is delivering on that. I don't believe that, zero tolerance policies and dragging kids into the school to prison pipeline construct over hairstyle or the way they're wearing their pants or a backpack that isn't up to snuff in the school. I don't believe that that's delivering on the promises that have been made around what our education system is supposed to deliver. So maybe it's because I'm steeped in policy all the time. I did live my day-to-day life in the policy world, but I think that there are real policy changes that have to be implemented, and it always begins and ends with where we spend our money, where we invest our resources. We are not investing resources in young people the way we should, and until we fix that, it's going to be very, very difficult to change the outcome.
Absolutely agree. And as a classroom teacher, I can agree with you wholeheartedly because we are seeing that, well, first of all, in Florida, we are at the lowest numbers in terms of funding for not just for not just for actual the education system itself or for teachers so we do understand if the money is not being spent correctly, if our money is not being dispersed correctly and utilized correctly, we're going to continue to see these kind of problems. And it seems to be so illogical that people cannot tie the two things together and understand that if one hand, one hand goes with the other, the issues that are occurring on one side is definitely going to affect the other. So, and in terms of policy, we do realize also that, going and speaking with so many different people, that we do have to hit the policymakers. They are the ones who truly have the, lack of a better word, power to affect change and to affect change in a positive way that we need to see for our youth. So I do want to thank you all so much for answering those questions on that aspect. I'm going to shift focus a little bit and let's talk about diversity itself. Okay, so now what is your specific definition of diversity before I go into another part of that question? When you think of diversity itself as represented not only in a school but also in just society in general, what is it? What does that mean to you? And we'll start with you, Brandon. Let's start with you first, then we'll go back around. Okay.
Sure, I appreciate that. For me, society is a bit like a quilt, and forgive me for the analogy, but my grandmother used to hand make these quilts, and she would give one to every kid, and they were all very different, right? And every patch she found and put together was meaningful to who you were. And so when you got the quilt from grandma, it was yours. It spoke to you. You carried it with you for the rest of your life. I still have mine in my closet, all bundled up. I take it out when it's cold outside. And for me, diversity is represented by that because all of us have this unique patchwork of identities that make up who we are, that are unique to who we are. And I think, part of the conversation that I know we're going to get into is how does that show up in society? How do we respect diversity? How do we turn diversity into inclusion? How do we turn it into equity? And the answer is that we have to be able to see all of those things in people. We can't ignore parts of their identity. We can't lump people together based on one part about them or the other. Instead, diversity, equity, inclusion, those things are about celebrating all that makes someone unique and the way that they fit into the bigger fabric of society. So for me, diversity is an opportunity. It's an opportunity for us to do more, to see each other, to lean into one another's talents. There are things that Fakila does that I can't do well, and I need Fakila in society to be able to do those things well in order for us all to thrive. So I see diversity as an opportunity waiting for us to take advantage of so that we can make society as a whole better by seeing each other.
Fakila?
Yes. Brandon, I love the way you said it's just everyone has their own specialties that they bring. And to me, diversity actually not only just brings opportunities, but just to piggyback on you, creativity. That can also bring about new ideas. I think diversity to me is kind of like that melting pot. Everyone is going to be different. Everyone needs to be recognized who they are and for what they are and how they are, and not just placed in one pot, but just have that melting pot so where we all come together. Representation matters. It matters all across the board. But I also think diversity comes with respect. and respecting different values, different opinions, different backgrounds, different cultures. So a lot of respect has to be also included in diversity as well.
Absolutely. And Laura, your thoughts?
I think all of those ideas are great. However, sometimes, often enough, a lot of teachers in the classroom are not culturally competent. Which I mean by that is they don't understand the kid's culture. So a kid saying something that they assume is bad, that's kind of like how they speak. It's a part of their culture. So until professionals, educators become competent enough to understand the language now of the kids, um, to get to the diversity, having the diversity in all of that as well.
Yeah, I appreciate that you leaned into this competence part, right? Because diversity can be accidental. Diversity is just what we live with every day. It's the uniqueness about us all. Equity and inclusion cannot be accidental. And that's where the responsibility, as Fakila said, lies on all of us to understand one another's differences, to respect them, to value them, to celebrate what they bring to the table, instead of simply lumping people all together or not being able to break outside of our implicit biases. So I really appreciate that you took it to the next level, because diversity is great. Having different faces at the table is great. Having different lived experiences in a classroom is great, but it amounts to nothing if we don't do the active work of being inclusive and equitable to people as well.
Right. And then I know that Andrew had a great comment that she made, which is what my thought was process was going, is how can we really address cultural competency without addressing first biases? Because everyone has their own biases, no matter how we look at it. It might not be as blatant as others, but we are biased, and this is going to affect how we not only treat children in the classroom, but how we see the world itself. So how I mean, do we feel that, of course, it is a something that must be tackled, and how, and it's just such a big, I guess, elephant that we're looking at overall. How do we actually tackle this issue of having people address their own biases? I mean, what do we do in that certain situation?
Awareness, a lot of awareness, and just letting people know that it's okay to be biased. Making it comfortable. It doesn't mean that you're racist. It doesn't mean that you're this. It's just consciously or even self-unconsciously, we're all going to have some type of bias. And it just needs to be comfortable to let people know, let's talk about this. Let's talk about your bias. And that can bring competency, but it can bring opportunities, like Brandon said. It can bring awareness to what we're just talking about, the round table, and education, just letting everyone know this is the culture that I come from, this is the background, this is the upbringing, this is how I talk, this is what I wear, all of that, to where it has to be accepted, to where, okay, if we're biased, just make it acceptable.
Right. Laura, how do you address it, especially now, you're also in the classroom. How would you address when someone does have those pushbacks, those issues, and saying, oh, this is how they're treating a child? How do you address them? Do you focus on them, or the issue itself? How do you deal with that?
I try to always find the positive in the child. So, being that now I'm in a position where I'm actually in the classroom as a mental health professional, at a particular school here in Hillsborough County. I've been there maybe 2 weeks now. So my first few days, I've observed the kids in the classroom. I've observed the kids on the playground, just to see the interaction with themselves and others. Um, just finding the positive, finding something positive, educating the teachers, like, don't always find the negative, find something positive. If they come, you ask them to pick up a piece of paper, they picked up the piece of paper, you give them a praise, you tell them you appreciate them listening, and they see something positive instead of always focusing on the negative.
It's true. Our children do need to see and hear us respect each other, us show each other that kind of love and respect, because we may not agree with each other all the time, but we do need to remove our own biases in order to help them grow. And this is the whole aspect behind nurturing them and encouraging them to grow up and grow forward. So just for us personally, looking at our own biases is going to allow us to move forward itself. So in terms of um, it within our schools and within our community, that's something that I know that we just have to talk to all the time. It just talk to people, each other all the time about that. Now here's the thing: when you're dealing with your own biases, how do you, like, for example, if you come across someone who totally has a negative aspect of basically against everything that you have to say, how do you deal with that particular issue just within your own environment? How do you deal with that?
Well, I think, first of all, it's important to say out loud, and I think it was Fakila that mentioned it, that bias is natural. It's who we are. It's born from a place of survival. We build in bias because we build in natural responses that we can rely on when we don't have time to think thoroughly about something, right? So we are biased about something that looks hot because we don't want to burn our hands. And so we have this subconscious mechanism that says, that looks hot, I don't want to touch it, it's going to burn my hand, right? The same thing is true about people. In order to speed up interactions throughout the day, we rely on biases all the time about people. And so it's important to say that out loud, that bias is normal, it's natural, it's part of the human existence, and it takes intentional work to deconstruct it. And then I think it's also really important to say out loud that we live in a time that encourages bias, that encourages us to live in little silos. When you open up your social media feed, a computer somewhere has calculated what you like most, what you're most interested in, and that's the stuff you look at all day long. It's the people's faces you see, it's the voices you hear. That's why when we get into an election cycle, people are baffled because they can't believe that there are so many people that see the world so differently from them. But every single day, every single hour of that day, they've been seeing and hearing information that confirms their biases in the world to keep them on an app looking at ads to make money for someone somewhere, right? So it's important to say those things out loud, that being biased is a natural part of being human, that you can only combat it intentionally, and we live in a society that encourages bias. So the question is, how do you confront it in your own life? How do you confront it in the way you talk to people? It's getting out from behind a screen. It's interacting with people who are different from you. It's having tough conversations. I tell my dad all the time, my dad is the opposite of me, 100%. We agree on almost nothing. But my dad and I find our humanity, and that's where we live together. I remember that my dad is a human, and the reason that I get frustrated and want to argue with him about things is because I love him and I care about him. If I didn't care, I wouldn't even engage in the conversation. And so when I find myself slipping into that bias or that frustration, I am reminded that he is a human sitting across from me, and I'm challenged to do the same with other people. I think that's the first step, is that we get out from behind our screens. We surround ourselves by people that are different from us. We are sponges. We want to learn. And that's how we begin to confront the biases that are baked into who we are.
That is absolutely excellent. I mean, and that actually was something that I just learned from you. You know, when we do have our biases and we need to confront them, we just got to look at the person and just say, just like with kids in school, this is a child. I know this child is going to be angry and a little bit off the chain, but this is still a child. So let me stop for a second and process and breathe a little bit, right? So, oh, that was awesome. Did anybody else want to chime in on how do you handle your own biases?
I know for me, a lot of I do a lot of interaction or discussion with colleagues or those who are professionals in the field and supervision, to where I disclose if I see something some way, or even if someone confronts me, and being confronted is not always a bad thing, but if someone tells me that maybe I did something to offend them or something, then it leads into conversations and we discuss and we talk about it. But I also like to be involved in different. I'm not afraid of different. Those who are different from me, a lot of times I want to learn, so I will not consciously be biased or offend someone. I go to church with them. I'm going to community events. I'm going to their different celebrations, just different cultures, just to be involved so that I can learn. And I ask questions a lot. Hey, I don't notice this. I don't want to offend you, but if I don't know something, I'm gonna ask so that I can just educate myself on different cultures, different races, different sexual, whatever it may be. I'm gonna ask. I'm just not afraid to ask, but just don't be afraid of different. It's not. Don't be afraid of different. Don't be afraid to be different, but get involved in it.
Absolutely. Laura, how do you deal with the biases that you encounter within yourself?
So for myself, I am always wanting to learn, right? So it doesn't matter what it is. I often challenge myself, and I also have challenged my kids, is if you enter a room and there's a different conversation going on in the room, I want you to be able to listen, see what they're talking about. Maybe you can learn something from the conversation. So that's why every day I challenge myself to find something different, something new that I want to learn. Um, in that manner, to challenge my own biases, because in the past, people are so guarded, like this is the only culture, this is all it could be, this is your all end all, you're black. I know I'm black, right? But I also like to go over to the Buddhist temple on Sunday and eat good food. You like the Buddhist temple? Of course, it's a nice, serene place. I enjoy going into the temple before COVID, getting some literature and doing some meditation. But you're black. That's bias. It doesn't mean anything.
Now we're talking about biases and intentionality. There's the school board 140. This was the SB 148 that prohibits organizations from requiring employees to participate in training and etc. So this is where we are focusing now on the fact that we have actual bills out there. There are just things out there that are telling us no. We I don't want to deal with this. I don't want people to be a part of this. I mean, this is the issue that we have right now, and so we have to constantly fight back, and especially when it comes to getting into that legislation. So right, what Brandon, what you're talking about, that legislation, it makes a big difference, and this is where the bill, except was the and I'm going to read it specifically off of here. The bill implies that white children are not being made to feel uncomfortable in the school setting. So, what type of impact do you think this is going to have on the black and brown children? If this is applicable, or this will be acceptable for white students, why is it that how would our black students feel about this?
Well, thank you. And this is right in my wheelhouse. That's why I'm in Tallahassee right now, is to do work around this legislation. So I appreciate you bringing it up. And it does fit with our conversation, right? We already talked about how the world, not only that it's natural to have bias, but also that we live in a world right now that encourages bias. And then on top of that, we have political leaders who have figured out how to capitalize on it. We have political leaders who have decided that fueling division, that feeding the flames of bias, helps them in the short term achieve some sort of goal. And usually that means to get to their next political destination. And that's where these bills are birthed from. So the bill you're talking about, the governor calls the Stop Woke Act. I won't even get into what woke means because it's like a tortured acronym and I can't remember what it actually stands for, but essentially it's doing what you're talking about, where it is shielding people from uncomfortable conversations about who we've been as a country, who we are going to continue to be if we don't make changes, who we are right now. And I think it was Nicole Hannah-Jones who said the most insidious part about these bills is that the white part is silent, right? We talk about parents' rights. We talk about, people's discomfort. We don't mean people's discomfort. We mean white people's discomfort. This bill is nothing to do with how black kids feel in a classroom when they have to hear some both sides nonsense about slavery, or they never learn about the Ocoee massacre or what happened on Black Wall Street, or that an entire generation's worth of redlining is the reason that we have such starkly different socioeconomic classes in different cities. There's no consideration for how those kids feel, how they feel uncomfortable in the classroom, not seeing their own lived experiences represented. It really is about protecting white children from the discomfort of learning the truth about our country. And it's shameful because the only way, as we said, to confront bias, the only way to improve outcomes for young people, to make society better, is to be honest with one another about who we've been, who we are today, and where we want to go together. If we can't be honest about, the the legacy of slavery and racism in our country, then how are we supposed to prevent the next generation from repeating the mistakes of the past? It's impossible. And so while we have to confront these things in our day-to-day lives, we have to, be willing to sit with our discomfort and be with people who are different from us. We also have to challenge our political systems and structures to stop feeding bias and division and hate, because the only thing that accomplishes is further bias, division, and hate down the road. Even though it gets somebody what they're looking for in the short term, it's such a disservice to us in the long run, and we have to be willing to call it out and challenge it. And sorry, I'm coming off my soapbox now, my political soapbox.
No, we love it. We thank you for it. Tequila, will you be adding anything?
I definitely agree with Brandon. And this is like my first year in my role going into the school. So I'm new with just like actually seeing things that are happening in the school in my role. However, I will say this month and this year, even with this being Black History Month at the particular school that I am, some of my brown and Black kids are just feeling from this new bill to where there's no celebration of Black History Month. They're not recognizing things. So, I've created a space for them to actually vent and tell how, process it so they can understand. Because they're still young, they're seeing these things. But even just nothing was done this month for celebration of Black history at the particular schools, no celebrations. And I had a parent who actually sits on the PTA board, and she's at another school with a client. I had to give her a space to, kind of vent about it, because she was upset that her kids are at this school, she's paying this education, and they're not celebrating or doing anything this month for Black History Month under this bill.
And just to jump in real quick, and that makes absolutely no sense, because it's not like it changes what Black History Month is about. It's an educational month. It's just like, a day of service for Thanksgiving. I mean, it's the same thing. I mean, to me, I don't understand it, but see, that goes in hand in hand with the other things that where we don't want to have these conversations on campus about, or give our children safe places for them to go and have those conversations. So this is very weary and tiresome for us as well, especially since all of this is built into the curriculum. But we have to also look at the fact that who's teaching the classes. That makes a difference too, because a lot of the social studies teachers are not even are when you allow people to choose what they want to put into the curriculum, you're going to choose. If you feel like you don't want to teach it, you're not going to teach it. And also, so now you've got a feeling of, well, my kids are being removed completely from any kind of representation in any of the books or anything like that. So that's just, just jumping all off on that. But going back a little bit, Laura, with that issue right there, we're going back to that bill where the white children and white parents have to feel safe, and how does that how what are the effect is it having for our Black children? What are your opinions on that?
I feel our kids need a place to be safe as well. So if we're not having the conversations about our kids, school is a place for education where they're going to learn. So it should be equal. The white kids get to learn, Black kids get to learn. We all learn together, until we all find a way that we work as a whole, not separation or division, Black or a white child, and get down back to the old basics where we're teaching these kids these things. Because I know Black history is very important in the growth of kids, right? They get to learn about different things, how this was made, who made this. It doesn't become, oh, this Black person made this or this white person made this. They learn together, right? They learn as a whole who made what. It's not like, oh, this Black person made this or this white person made this. I really feel that it should be collectively done together as a whole. It should be education and back in the schools, or someone should be doing it.
And then, but as you see the push with a variety of schools now, with how we're looking at separating our kids out, with charters and all these just different things, you're going to see. I mean, I just see a push, such a great pushback, which we as educators and as parents and advocates, we just have to push. We have to push back against their pushback and really keep on saying it to ourselves. We got to not allow our history and our culture to be destroyed. And this is the history and culture that's good for everyone. It's like looking at I was actually reading a study about how the Germans are dealing with teaching World War II, teaching their history. How do they do it? How do they, because they have to accept that this happened. So same thing here. Part of a problem within our country is where we're not willing to accept what happened so that we can heal and move forward. That's one of the biggest issues that we have as a country, which leads me right into this next question where we were talking about people being in their feelings. Here's this question: when somebody says that I don't see color, I've always loved this question. When someone says I don't see color, is that a positive or is that a negative statement? Jump right in. Go ahead,
Well,
Brandon. Go ahead.
I find it so insulting, because you are telling me, I mean, you're saying out loud that you don't see a whole part of me. There's culture behind who I am. There's a whole person here. I have a lot of different identities that make me who I am, and I'm proud of them. I'm proud to be a Black American. I'm proud to be a queer person. That's part of what makes me this particular square on the quilt of society. And it's really insulting for someone to look at me and say I'm choosing not to see part of who you are. And by the way, as we talk about people, as you said, being in their feelings, it is largely because they're trying to protect their own comfort rather than challenge themselves to understand someone more fully, rather than push themselves beyond the bounds of their biases or to address some of the issues that they have going on. They simply wash their hands of having the conversation at all and say, well, I simply don't see part of who you are, and that makes it all better, right? I know that was sort of rhetoric for quite some time, that people thought they were being anti-racist by saying, I don't see color. Everyone's just the same to me. I live in utopia. But that's not true. I mean, we are different on purpose, right? That's part of what makes us beautiful. And acknowledging me as a whole person, as a Black queer person, and all the other things that make me who I am is important to me. And it's insulting when people say they would be willing to not see part of me, to shield their own comfort level.
Mhm. Tequila?
Absolutely. I think it's just one of those type of statements that someone is just going to use to be safe, to avoid certain conversations, to avoid certain topics, just to say I don't see color. But color is it's everywhere. You can see the color. The world is built on color. We're separated by color. So just to say that you don't see color, I just think that it's just an excuse for someone to just avoid being uncomfortable, avoid just certain topics, and just to be very dismissive.
Absolutely. Laura?
I would agree with both Fakila and Brandon on this conversation. When you say you don't see color, that means I'm invisible at this point. Like you don't see me, you don't see my point of view, you're not seeing my interest. You're and I don't. It's not a good word to say.
Yeah, and by the way, you're not just making me invisible, you're making my family invisible, you're making, my community invisible, the people that I live with, the people that I live around. If I have children, you're making my children feel invisible too. So again, if anybody's tuning in and they're thinking that they have found some secret sauce by saying that they don't see color, sorry, you're wrong. You are making people feel erased and invisible, and it's incredibly insulting.
So, which leads us back to that whole concept of nurturing greatness. Well, we ignoring a person's race, whether they Asian or Hispanic or Black or whatever ever race they are, we can't nurture your greatness because we don't even see you. So we're seeing you on the confines of, okay, well, this is the blanket society that everyone has been fed for so long. I mean, each of us, I don't know what our ages are, but I know growing up, the predominant uh, images that were placed in front of me were always of particularly white, a male. And it's usually that's the standard by which everything else is based upon. And it's unfair that when you start to to learn about yourself, you realize, wow, there's a lot to me that is wonderful, that I want to celebrate, that I want to share with other people. So when you feel that that's suppressed, that right there is it's horrific. And I don't see. And Fakila, one of the saddest things you said was that a child doesn't this a child, it's Black History Month, and the kids are not even seeing it being celebrated openly, and that really bothers me, because right now, like, even up to this is the year 2022, and there are still children that do not believe that Egypt is in Africa, and that bothers me to my core, because I was like, wait a minute, this is not right. So what can we do now? How could we, and let me go back to this. This is a barrier, and there's no other word I can use for this. This is a barrier to a child's growth and their education. So what kind of systems, what kind of things would you put in place to say, hey, when somebody comes up and says, look, I don't see color, how would you address that? Or how do you think a school itself should actually address that issue with their staff, with their faculty?
Once again, I'll go back to being culturally competent. And all, that's it. Being culturally competent.
Fakila.
I agree with Laura, but I also think it has to start with those who are in charge, to where they need to sit down and have these roundtable meetings to understand how insensitive it is, how offensive it is, and how unfair it is, to where you're actually allowing. And I know, for instance, I've heard this is just things that I'm just hearing during just allowing these safe spaces to. You have parents who are threatening to write petitions or threatening to go higher and grant. So these simple threats from these parents are allowing you to say, okay, we're not even going to have something as simple as a library, Black books or books that were from Black authors or something that's representing, because this amount of parents are threatening to do this and threatening to go. Let them go. Like, just don't be afraid of the threats. Fight back. Okay, simple threats, because you don't know if they're going to do it or not, but just allowing that to, I think, just have to go to higher ups, have these meetings, like Brandon said, going to Tallahassee, get our own petition signed, get things like that, to where you're going to have to push, and it's going to have to go from higher ups down.
Yeah, and I appreciate that what you're alluding to is that it's a sign of a bigger, deeper problem, right? If somebody is comfortable, let's say a staff member or an administrator or somebody like that is comfortable making a statement like, well, I don't see color, so I don't see the purpose in even having this conversation, then it tells you that there's a systemic issue going on, that there is a fundamental lack of cultural competence, that there's a fundamental lack of understanding, that there may be even a fundamental lack of caring about whether or not these things are important in a school setting. And that has to be met head on. It can't be, you can't put a Band-Aid on it. You can't pretend like it's not there. You can't have a one-off conversation. If you have an environment, I managed businesses for a long time, and I had 14 stores at one point, and I could tell you, based on the conversations that someone was having behind a cash register, what kind of leadership structure was there, because you can tell what's acceptable and what's not. If they'll say it in front of me, I can't even believe what they're saying when I'm not there. The same is true for educational environments. When someone is willing to say something like that within earshot, you know that there's more going on, and you have to have some tough conversations about what the culture and climate of that school is, and whether or not it's actually safe and beneficial for young people. Because at the end of the day, all these things come back to, how do we create the best spaces possible so that young people can thrive? And that means addressing bias. It means addressing cultural competency, means addressing resources and policy. All of those things have to come together if we're going to improve outcomes for young people.
And I will jump in by saying this, yet it has to be top down. So, and it ties right into who you hire as well. So if admin is looking at it from this perspective, and then they're hiring people who are also of that mindset to say, okay, no, we have to make sure we see the whole child. We have to understand everything about that child, understand the child's culture. Then it's gonna make a difference for the student. It's gonna make a difference all around in the general conversations that you're having within your school. So that's key. So I mean, so we're going to tie in hiring practices to that too, because I always believe it's who you hire it's going to make a difference as well. I'm sorry, Fakila, you want to add to it? No, you're good.
I was just agreeing with you, Miss Denise.
Okay, great, thank you. All right, so now, oh, sorry. So what do you see? What do you? And I'm sorry, my audio is still good. What do you see as a structural barrier to creating equitable experiences for our Black students? What's there could be a number of barriers, but what's any barrier that creates a great experience for our kids? And I know one of them that we spoke about earlier dealt with, how we're policing our children and how we're giving them more of discipline, but less mental health, less ability to have access to that. So what's let me start with you, Fakila. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yes. Definitely, as far as the mental health services, and I've always been a big advocate for bringing mental health services more so into the schools. Definitely that is a big challenge, not only just the mental health services, but clinicians of color. You, it matters. Again, going back to what I say, representation matters. And even our methods in how we approach dealing with mental health for our own community is going to be different. So I think that is very important to where they need to get some more clinicians of colors, not only just clinicians of color, but more mental health services in place in the schools, on site, actually in the schools, whether it's the assessment versus, let's say you have a child that's always getting in trouble. Okay, that doesn't necessarily mean the court needs to be involved, but let's get those mental health services or give the referrals out to mental health services so that they can know where to go, so the family can know the resources that are available, so that we can start breaking that negative stigma in our community when it comes to mental health. In order for them to heal, and in order for them to get better, I think that's one of the things is we got to bring more awareness to the families, bring more awareness to the community, to where this negative stigma, mental health is real. It's either going to be behaviors or it's going to be symptoms, but it's one or the other, and sometimes it's both. So more so of trying to see not what our children are doing, but asking them, how are they feeling? How are they feeling? Teaching them how to express themselves. More so these males, to where a lot of their anger and a lot of their aggression is the misconception that they are depressed. Doesn't have to be in sadness, but are our males depressed? And do they need healing, or do they need that motivation and the resources that are available? Even for us to just encourage them to get help, encourage the families to come down and say, hey, these are the services that you have. Here's where you can go. This person is going to treat you like this. Because even in the mental health services, they're not always catered for us, and they're not always going to have a good experience when it comes to those services. But just creating a safe space for those brown and Black kids in the schools.
Oh, absolutely. Okay, Brandon, what barriers do you see that are taking place that just hinder our children's growth?
Oh, there are so many. And I feel like we're sort of drowning in them, and it's hard to figure out where to start. But I always go back to resources because it's so tangible and finite, right? We could talk all day long about the changing of hearts and minds and things like that. But at the end of the day, we need resources. We need to be able to put real money behind what we're talking about. If we're going to increase, let's say, mental health services in schools, that's going to take money, and it's going to take money coming from somewhere else where it's not where it is today to go into those mental health resources. It's going to mean probably fewer people with guns on their hip walking around the hallways, and more people who are knowledgeable about mental health in counselors' offices. So I go back to, we have a fundamentally broken system of resources. We have a system that funnels money to people who are very, very wealthy already, and gives them, endless access to everything they could possibly need to be successful, and then robs a vast majority of people of the things that they need to be just exactly who they are to thrive. We have to get serious about that. We have to get serious about the way that structure is broken. We have to get serious about, how some people see public education as a problem and they want to dismantle public education as a whole. And part of their strategy is to starve public schools of resources, right? Those are all things that are in play right now. And I think, if we're gonna fix things, if we're gonna make things better for young people and especially for Black boys, I think we have to be honest about where our resources are going today and reallocate them in a dramatically different way in the future. So for me, it's all about the money. Show me the money and let's put it to good use instead of just sending everybody to jail. That doesn't do anything.
Right, exactly. Lori, what are other barriers that you see?
Um, Same thing, lack of resources, lack of teachers understanding behaviors in kids with mental health. First year teachers in classrooms with kids that have severe behaviors. No training at all. Getting hit on, beat up, and no one has taught them how to redirect the abuse from a child, or just the lack of training and resources there are for teachers, as well as the resources for the kids. It has been greatly my experience.
And Fakila, I'm going to jump in here to say, piggyback off of something that you were saying. A lot of times when we see these behaviors in our children, we're thinking, well, they're just bad, or this is how they. But we're not looking at those underlying issues. Like the one thing I've learned just in my 20 plus years of teaching is that sometimes children are just. It's as simple as them just being hungry. I had some kids who just be angry first thing in the morning, but I'm like, well, let me, if I dig down a little bit deeper and realize, wait a minute, you came in late. That means you missed the bus. That means you missed breakfast. And now you're here and you've had to deal with your siblings and you're just hungry. So let's just stop a second and go back and grab a breakfast bar and some juices and get you your physical needs met first. Then I should be able to teach you at this point in time because now you're full, you're comfortable, you're happy. So I think a lot of times we overlook what is the basic needs of our children, and then we're so quick to go ahead and jump and start testing them and test them and test them. But have you looked at where the child's coming from, their environment, which leads right into Brandon what you're saying, the fact that I'm gonna run back and talk about redlining too, where we're going all the way back to the fact that if we're only in this particular area, we've been placed in a particular box, we're placed in a particular area, and especially now as society becomes more oppressive in terms of the cost of food is going up, the cost of living is going up, our health is declining, all these things, and you're forcing people into this box, and you expect that children are not going to react to any of that. It's like it's bad enough we as an adults are struggling, but looking at the fact that kids are actually paying attention to all of this, and so therein lies the traumas of how are we able to pull them out of that, to get them beyond that. This is the quandary, the issue. This is the big thing that we have as adults, and I feel from my perspective is yeah, a lot of it deals with legislation, a lot of it deals with funding. What are we going to do with well, is the funding going to be allocated? Do the people who are in charge? I'm talking all up in Tallahassee. Are they willing to release the funds? Because sometimes they will get the money, but then they'll be like, well, hmm, I don't want to give it to you right now. But we're struggling and we need it. That's the thing. So I thank you all for your comments about that, because that's a big thing for me too. I was sitting here bursting to wait. I'm gonna jump all in and talk all over you, but I really wanted to agree with it, just pretty much everything that you were saying, because this is just such an important thing for us now. As a classroom teacher as well, we're looking at how do we allow ourselves to get to this point, and how is it that we're going to help our children move beyond where they are right now. So this is a difficult thing, but we feel that it's all about community. It is all about parenting. It is all about teachers, because like we've always said, and we said time and time again, uh, parents don't write referrals, teachers do. And then you have then it leads to admin, which then leads further out into the school to prison pipeline with, and then we finally get to the state attorney's office, and at that point in time it's too late. So in order for us to make sure that our kids get what they need, I mean, on just a basic uh bottom line level, I think one of the things that we probably need to do is just pull back. I feel like I think they're now, this is me speaking now personally, in terms of everything that we're throwing at them with testing and with changing standards and changing, every time you change a curriculum. I think we just need to go all the way back to basics and just address the child's issues, right? I mean, especially if you're coming, all of you from a mental health perspective and just looking at the child itself. I mean, what would you say would be one of the primary needs that we need to address with our youth, just having them dealing with their own personal trauma? What's one of the primary things that we need to look at?
Well, I appreciate that you said the physical health of a child, right? And very specifically, like, you can't learn if your basic needs aren't met. I firmly believe, and maybe this, I don't know what this makes me, but I firmly believe that no child should be hungry at school. It's unconscionable. In the wealthiest nation in the history of the planet, kids should not be sitting in classrooms being hungry. It's just unconscionable to me. And they're not able to learn. They're not able to thrive. They can't, retain any of that information. So the physical health, I'm co-signing that. We have to meet the basic needs of young people every single day as a society. We need to be able to invest in that. And then outside of that, I'm coming to this with an LGBTQ lens, and I think it's important for students to see themselves as safe and respected and valued in the classroom. And that means being seen as their whole selves. One of the things that concerns me about some of the bills that we were talking about, whether it's the Don't Say Gay bill or the one that would stop us from having conversations about race, is that they are designed, whether they pass or not, to have a chilling effect on the work that we've done to help students be seen in the classroom. And that's showing up already. Florida Virtual Schools already took down rainbow stickers that they had on their virtual classrooms that told kids that they were safe in those classrooms, because they feared that that would be retaliated against by parents and otherwise. We saw in Osceola County that they had a civil rights week symposium that they were putting on, and they canceled the entire event because they were afraid that one history professor who was going to give a lesson on Black history would be seen as critical race theory, and that they would face backlash from the community. And what that does is it erases young people's identities from the classroom. They no longer see themselves represented in curriculum. They no longer see themselves as welcomed and safe and appreciated and valued by their teachers and their administrators. And then they close off, right? They pull back from society. They have other mental health issues that come out, PTSD and depression and anxiety, and ultimately suicidality comes in there. And the way that we address that is by making sure that kids feel seen. They see value. They feel valued. They feel appreciated in the classroom. That takes real work, and it takes us being honest and inclusive about our approach. Right now, I think we're in real peril of slipping away from the work that we've done there. We have to double down on it. We really have to invest in making sure that young people feel that they're valued in the classroom.
I agree with what Brandon said. And just real quick, I think the most important thing is school needs to feel safe again. These kids and these students are not feeling safe at school. It's not a safe space for them. So I think, again, going back to what he said, it's going to take work. It's going to take work, a lot of education, a lot of awareness, collaboration, and those things to make these kids feel heard, create a safe space for them to where, okay, you may not be having a good day or you may be having a rough day, but here's someone downstairs for you to talk to, whether it's 15 minutes, 30 minutes, process it and come back up or whatever it may be. But I definitely think that the schools need to be more of create a safe haven for these kids because a lot of them are lacking just simple, basic wellness. You mentioned hungry, but a lot of times some of the students that I get, more so my little ones, they're tired. They're not getting enough sleep. A few weeks ago, I had a little kindergartner misbehaving and acting up. Now, because I gather information, I know a little bit more of the family backgrounds. I keep a bean bag and I keep blankets in the class in my office just to let him sleep for an hour or so. He just was tired. He's bouncing back and forth. Mom trying to do what she can to work, so he's here, he's there, getting picked up. but just basic lack of just their wellness is not there. And they are definitely going through a lot of things just at home, looking for school to be that safe space. And then they get to school and that's not a safe space. So then it just creates a very dysfunctional cycle.
All right, Laura.
I would agree with both Brandon and Fakila. Knowing a little bit of the child's background, family history, especially when you're dealing with kids with behavioral issues, knowing where some of it stems from. Like some of the kids aren't made, like Fakila said, are not sleeping at night. Some of the kids, there may be a parent that has an addiction. They may be living with an elderly grandmother. There may be some DV in the home. They may live in a neighborhood where there's gun violence every night. So being aware of what the child is dealing with and also making the school a safe place, even if there's no mental health professional in the classroom, that teacher having maybe the basic knowledge of tackling the child's feelings, like asking that question, are you okay? How can I help you today? How can I make your day better? Just those simple things.
And April jumped in and said it's going to take the teachers and administrators, anyone who interacts with our children to on the school campus to do what's best for all children. It doesn't matter what their race is, what their gender is, what their sexuality is. Everyone needs to be together on this issue. It shouldn't be one or two people. And sometimes it does feel like an uphill battle because you may be the only one that's like, okay, do you realize like what the people need to take into account? It's it always amazes me how some teachers will say, I have a problem with this child over and over and over again, but yet you go to two other teachers and another teacher does not have a problem with that child at all, because it's all about building relationships. It's all about sitting there and saying, you know what, did you know this child, this is where they live, this is what's happening at home, or our grandma just passed away. And especially in this time of COVID that we're in right now, a lot of kids have experienced deaths in their family. And we've had kids who've lost both parents and are now living with grandparents or living with auntie, or living in a situation that they never thought they'd ever have to be in. So it's a matter of just looking at their looking, just removing all this other outside stuff and saying, hey, look at where our children are experiencing right now. Look at what's happening in their lives right now. This is school is supposed to be the safe space, but we don't see it. Kids will come to school and be like, look, I remember it used to be the kids didn't want to leave for Christmas. They didn't want to leave for spring break. They didn't want to leave. Sometimes it's just like, okay, this is all I got left. So it's like, where do we put them? Where are they? It's just everything. So and April said, what is most troubling that the safe space and mental health have become now buzzwords in politics. Okay, and that the fact that there is little, and she's absolutely right, little action behind these words, which is just a sad thing. Now, go
Denise,
ahead. Mhm.
well, what I appreciate about that is that can happen, right? When we say we want to do something, we make promises, and certainly when it gets scooped up by politics, things become campaign rhetoric instead of actual action, right? And so I heard somebody say it the other day, I can't remember where I was, but somebody said something that was fairly profound to me, and that was that teachers, educators, administrators are first responders. They are first responders for young people, regardless of what's happening at home. As Laura was saying, maybe it's domestic violence, maybe it's gun violence, maybe there's a lack of food in the home, maybe, as you said, they've gone through a death in the family, they've changed family situations. The people who respond every morning to that are educators. They're the classroom teachers who see that kid every single day. And I come back to this resource question. What other first responder would we limit resources in this way? Do we pay teachers as if they were first responders and the most important component to that young person's ability to thrive? Do we give them the physical resources necessary to be the kind of first responders we need them to be? When a teacher is buying their own reams of paper and Kleenex for the classroom, it's impossible for them to be the kind of first responder that we're asking them to be for these young people. So I want to see, as April said in the chat, I want to see much less talk about safe space, and I want to see much more action. How are you showing up differently for young people tomorrow than you showed up today to make their lives better, to give them what they need to succeed? And that goes for all of us, not just teachers, not just administrators who are working cash strapped all the time, but every single one of us in society is going to benefit from the next generation being successful. So how are we collectively setting them up for that success?
Excellent, excellent. Thank you for that. I mean, yes. What are we gonna do? And I'm looking at my time, trying to be cognizant of everyone's time. But I will go throw out there one additional question, or let's say basically like a wrap up question. So here's my thing. Throw it out to you all. And me as a teacher, I for me, I would love to just scrap everything that we know and go back to basics in terms of education. But here's my question to you: if you had the ability to immediately change one thing in our education system or societal support system, and that thing will be implemented successfully tomorrow, what would that be? Think about that. I will say this for me. I would get rid of everything that has to do with testing, because that's not what we need right now. I believe that we need to focus on the whole. I'm old school, and I grew up with a very liberal arts type of background. So we had everything, home ec, we had construction, we had sewing, we had life skills, and everything that helped to make me a well-rounded person. But I would also have, I felt like I was supported. I felt like school was my safe place, that place away from home, and that was where all my relationships were being built, and I learned to be a decent person. So for me, that's the thing that I would scrap. But if I would immediately change one thing in our education system or a societal support system, what would that be? And let me see, Tequila.
And of course, I'm coming from a different role. So I'm coming from more the resource side, the clinician side. I would definitely how the referrals are passed down, or how the referrals are submitted, to where I think the criteria needs to be changed to where to recognize to make it a little bit easier. But again, that goes back to what we've been talking about, the lack of the resources. So I think more resources need to be implemented to where referrals can be submitted out more and even earlier, until they're waiting until it's too late, but to just be proactive with the resources and the referrals.
Laura?
I would say finding community partners that can enter the schools and provide additional resources. I think many years ago, outside communities, things were allowed into the school, and now I don't know so much so of people being able to come into the school and teach like social skills, or like you said, a home ec class, something to get the kids involved, other than like education, like something outside. My plan is at the school that I am at now. I spoke to the school social worker. My plan for the spring is to show the kids how to fly a kite. Right? We're going to use bubbles as a way of teaching anger management. So we're going to use a bubble, blow a bubble out. So it's like getting the kids things that they can use as a tool when they enter back out into the community, right? So the kite is calming. They can see the wind. They can run. Finding other things, bringing in like sensory toys, even though they're not all the kids are ASD, but kids like textures now. I'm noticing that they like fidget spinners. They like all the things that they can't have in the classroom that keeps them calm. But what I have noticed, that some of the educators have allowed the kids to play Minecraft and all these other games during education time. And it's because, and to this day, I've asked that question, why is education not being taught? Oh, because it's their behavior, but you're rewarding them with the game. So for myself, I just that whole back to the basics thing. We don't reward bad behavior. We teach positive reinforcement, right? And just having that mindset of working with these teachers, of having an open mind when I'm asking or trying to teach them something new that they're not used to, right? Being open to learning something different than, oh, he's upset, he cursed me out, he threw a chair. Oh, you can sit down and play Minecraft. The real world won't work that way. And then we'll end up what, in school pipeline to prison, because they try that behavior in middle school. Then what, they're suspended, and then they're the alternative school, and then they haven't fixed their behavior. We haven't worked to fix their behavior.
Yeah. Okay, so this is a big question, and I'm just going to go pie in the sky. If I could change anything about society that would make things better, it would be to totally reimagine us moving away from a punitive system to an investment system and investing in people 100%. And that means all of us, right? We have a very greedy, punitive system that punishes people for being poor. It punishes people for having housing insecurity. It punishes people for dealing with mental health issues and addiction issues. And it funnels money to people who are already wealthy and greedy and have more than they could possibly imagine. And in order for us to rethink how we could grow as a society together, I would love to see us move away from punishing people, away from this punitive disciplinary system, and instead think about every single one of those kids who's sitting in classrooms as something to invest in. I would like to see, as Laura said, more community engagement. People who don't have kids still benefit from all of the things that schools provide, right? They turn out an educated workforce who then go and make our economy, our engine run. And so it's incumbent upon all of us, whether we have kids in the system, whether we don't, whether we'll ever have kids in the system or not, that we're all making the choice to invest in young people. And so if I could change one thing tomorrow, it would be to totally upend our system, to stop this idea of having to punish and discipline everyone for everything, and instead really rethink how we're investing in young people, how we're investing in their physical health, their mental health, their overall well-being, their education, so that they go out and they can thrive and they can be the best version of themselves. So that's really big. But if I could change one thing tomorrow, it would always be to stop punishing and start investing.
Absolutely. I just absolutely loved all of your responses. And we'll say this in the words of my good friend April Cobb, who always says this, is that teaching is one of those professions that creates other professions. And it is so important that we invest in our children, because this is the future. We're not going to be here forever, but when our product is the children. So when we're producing people who are going to be beneficial to society, who are going to be an asset to society, who are going to allow those creative minds to go out, they're going to be the new tech people of the future. Going to push our society forward. We have to invest in them, and if we're not investing in them, we are going to watch the downfall of our society. And going back to what April was Bianca were both saying, is that if we overutilize technology, it's not good to pacify our children with technology. Get them outside, let them get some fresh air. I mean, it's good. It's a good thing. We drank from the water hose and we're all still alive. Let's just say that. Okay. So, but I wanted to thank you all so much. This has been a wonderful, wonderful experience, an excellent panel discussion on nurturing greatness. And I want to thank each and every one of you, Fakila, and Laura, as well as Brandon. Thank you on behalf of the Sunshine Education Coalition, on behalf of myself, Denise Thomas, April Cobb, the co-chairs, and again, a great big thank you as well to our producer, Brianka Goolsby, from Teaching for the Culture. And we just want to thank you all so much for being here with us this evening, and everyone who was visited on us, who stayed with us and watched the entire forum. So again, I want to tell you, thank you all for being here. Please join us very soon again next week, Monday at 6:30. We have another panel discussion as well. And please visit us again on the www.sunshineeducationcoalition.org. Have a good evening, everyone. Thank you.